Ambassador Thyra Voss had lived for 312 years, and in all that time she had never been surprised by a species she hadn't studied first. She was Cathari, tall, thin, with a body like black glass, and 4 arms that folded neatly behind her back when she was thinking. Her people were watchers. They studied, they recorded, they understood things long before others did. That was their gift, and Thyro carried it with pride. So when the Galactic Concord announced that humanity would be presenting at the military exhibition on Nexus Primata, Thyro made sure she had a front row seat. Nexus Primata was a station the size of a small moon floating in neutral space where no species could claim ownership. It was the heart of galactic diplomacy. 316 species, all bound together by treaties and trade and the quiet agreement that war was bad for business. Every 10 cycles the Concord held its military exhibition, a grand display where each species showed off its armed forces. It was part tradition, part warning, and part theater. Everyone smiled and clapped while secretly measuring each other's teeth. Humanity had been a member of the Concord for only 40 years. In galactic terms, they were newborns. Most species had been spacefaring for thousands of years, some for tens of thousands. Humans had barely figured out faster than light travel before stumbling into first contact with a Divan trading vessel, the edge of their little solar system. Since then they had been polite, quiet, and largely forgettable, a small species from a small world, trading in basic goods and asking too many questions. Thyrol had read every report on them. Mammalian bipeds, warm-blooded, fragile bones compared to most species, short lifespans, barely a century. Even with their medical technology, they breathed volatile oxygen-nitrogen mix, drank a universal solvent they called water, and lived on a planet with active tectonic plates, extreme weather, and a rotational tilt that gave them wildly unstable seasons. By all logic, they should have gone extinct long before reaching space, and yet here they were. The exhibition hall was enormous, a curved amphitheater that could seat representatives from every member species. Thyrol sat in the Cathari section, her 4 eyes scanning the human delegation as they entered. There were only about 30 of them, led by a woman named General Ara Mwangi. She was small by human standards, compact, dark-skinned with close-cropped silver hair and calm brown eyes. She walked with the easy confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. The presentations before humanities were impressive in the way they always were. The Divan hegemony showed footage of their shock troops, 8-foot reptilian warriors in powered armor tearing through training simulations with raw, brutal force. Crowd murmured with respect. The solar Dominion demonstrated their hive mind coordination, 10,000 silicon-based soldiers moving as one, each unit aware of every other unit's position in real time, executing maneuvers with mathematical precision. The Arath Warlands displayed their psychic warriors who could crush metal with their minds and sense enemies from miles away. They had not lost a single war in 6,000 years, and they made sure everyone remembered that. Then it was humanity's turn. General Mwangi stepped to the podium and smiled. It was a small, polite smile, the kind someone might give at a dinner party. She introduced Earth Standard Peacekeeping Forces and played a series of video recordings. The footage showed human soldiers running drills on various colony worlds. They trained in deserts, in frozen mountain ranges, in dense jungles, underwater, and in the vacuum of space. They carried weapons that looked simple, compared to driven plasma cannons or solar rail systems, projectile-based rifles, compact explosives, bladed tools. They called combat knives. Their armor was functional, not flashy, but Theo noticed things. She noticed that the human soldiers adapted their tactics to every environment without hesitation. When a training scenario changed mid-exercise, the soldiers didn't freeze or wait for new orders. They adjusted on their own instantly, each one making independent decisions that somehow supported the group without any visible communication system. She noticed that in one clip, a human soldier was injured during a live training exercise, a deep cut across the forearm from a piece of shrapnel. The soldier wrapped the wound with a strip of cloth, picked up her weapon, and continued the drill. She finished it. Then she went to the medical tent. Not before she noticed that in another clip, a squad of 12 humans fought off a hostile predator on a colony world. Creature the size of a ground transport. Armored and fast, the humans didn't have heavy weapons. They used the terrain, set traps, worked together, and brought the creature down in under 4 minutes. When it was over, one of them laughed. Actually laughed as if fighting a creature 10 times their size was something they found exciting. The gallery gave polite applause when the presentation ended. The general assessment was respectful but unarmed. The conquered military analysts classified humanity as a mid-tier martial species, strong for their size, surprisingly adaptable, good teamwork, but nothing that would keep anyone awake. At night, Thyro filed her own assessment, but something nagged at her. After the presentations, she found General M. Wangi at a diplomatic reception. The human was drinking something amber cold from a small glass and making pleasant conversation with a Iraqi delegate. Thyro approached and introduced herself. A fine presentation, General, Thyro said. Your forces are more capable than many expected. Mangi tilted her head. Thank you, Ambassador. We try to be prepared. I noticed something in your data packet, Thyro continued. There was a classification tier above your standard forces, but the files were sealed. Redacted. Mwanga's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Small, quiet gate closing. Those are our elite warriors, she said simply. And what can you tell me about them? Mwangi took a sip of her drink. She looked at Thyro with those calm brown eyes, and for just a moment Thyro felt something she rarely felt, the sense that she was looking at a depth she could not measure. You won't need to worry about them, Mwangi said softly, and she smiled again, that same polite small smile, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. Thyro returned to her quarters that night and added a single note to her personal file on humanity. There is something they are not showing us. I do not know what it is. I do not know if I want to. She filed the note and moved on. The galaxy moved on. Nobody investigated further. Nobody asked what humanity kept behind its locked doors. That was a mistake. But the galaxy would not understand that for another 18 months, and by then, something ancient and terrible would be crawling out of the dark between the stars, and every species in the conquered would learn a very simple lesson. The most dangerous creatures in the universe are not the ones who show You their claws, they are the ones who keep them hidden until the day you need them, and on that day you pray they are on your side. 18 months after the military exhibition, the first colony went silent. It was a small mining settlement on the edge of the Ashenville expanse, a stretch of dead star systems near the galactic rim that nobody cared about. The colony belonged to the Solar Dominion, and it had a population of 8,000. One day it was sending regular reports, the next day nothing, no distress call, no signal, just silence. The Dominion sent a patrol ship to investigate. When the ship arrived, the crew found the colony standing exactly as it had been, buildings intact, machinery still running, lights still on, but there were no people. 8,000. Solar had vanished. The only thing wrong was a strange glowing residue that covered the walls and floors of every building. It was bioluminescent, soft, blue-green, like something alive. Patrol crew collected samples and left. 3 days later, a second colony went silent, then a third, then a fourth. Within 2 months, 11 colonies across the frontier had been emptied. Different species, different systems, all the same pattern, populations gone, structures untouched, and that same glowing residue left behind like a signature. The Galactic Concord held an emergency session. Fear filled the chamber like smoke. Thyrova sat in her seat and watched the delegates argue. Everyone had theories, nobody had answers. The Concord decided to act. They sent their 3 strongest military forces, the same 3 that had impressed everyone at the exhibition. The Divan hegemony assembled a fleet of 400 warships carrying 60,000 shock troops. The Solar Dominion deployed 800 worked combat vessels, moving as a single mind. The Arathi Warlands sent their ancient psychic battle cruisers, crewed by warriors who had never known defeat. Together they represented the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever gathered in one place. Over 2,000 ships, hundreds of thousands of the finest soldiers from 3 civilizations that had dominated warfare for millennia. They entered the Ashenville expanse. For 6 hours the Concord received regular updates. The fleets were advancing in formation. Sensors were detecting unusual biological signatures ahead, massive ones spread across an area that shouldn't have contained anything at all. Then the feeds began to break apart. The Divan fleet reported contact first. Something was emerging from the dark between the stars, structures that were not built, but grown. Living ships, each 1 mi long, covered in the same bioluminescent residue. They moved without engines. They made no sound. There were thousands of them. The Divan opened fire. Their plasma cannons tore into the first wave of biohips, shredding them apart. For a brief, hopeful moment, the Concord chamber erupted in relief. Then the second wave arrived, and the plasma cannons did nothing. The enemy had changed. In the span of minutes it had adapted. Its whole material had shifted, restructured itself at the molecular level to absorb plasma energy. The Divan switched to kinetic rounds. The first volley worked, the second did not. The enemy adapted again. The Solar Dominion tried a different approach. Their hive mind coordination allowed them to attack from 800 angles simultaneously, overwhelming the enemy with mathematical precision. It worked for 11 minutes. Then the biochips began mirroring their patterns, predicting their movements, countering their formations, as if reading their thoughts. The hive mind met something older and vaster than itself, and it could not keep up. Arathi Warlands unleashed their psychic warriors, minds that could crush. Warships reached out to touch the enemy's consciousness and recoiled. The warriors screamed, some collapsed. Others clawed at their own skulls. Whatever lived inside those biohips was not a collection of creatures, it was one mind, one enormous, ancient, hungry intelligence that stretched across the entire expanse. And when the Arai tried to touch it, it touched them back. Battle lasted less than a day. 2,000 ships entered the Ashenville expanse. 43 came back. Thyra watched the survivors arrive at Nexus Primata. They were broken, not just physically. Something inside them had been torn away. A Divan commander, a warrior who had fought in 12 campaigns, sat in a medical bay and wept like a child. He said the enemy moved through walls. He said it ate his soldiers from the inside. He said it learned everything they did and turned it against them before they could react. Arathi Elder, one of the most powerful psychic minds in the galaxy, sat in silence for 3 days before speaking a single sentence. It remembers everything it has ever consumed, every mind, every species, every civilization. We are not the first galaxy it has eaten. The conquered scientists gave the enemy name the Voron. They pulled ancient records from archives that hadn't been opened in millions of years and found references, fragments, warnings, cave paintings from species long extinct. Voron was a swarm intelligence, parasite on a cosmic scale. It moved between galaxies, consuming everything, adapting to everything, growing stronger. With every civilization it devoured, it had been sleeping somewhere beyond the rim, and now it was awake. Panic swept through the conquered like wildfire. Species began pulling their fleets back to their home worlds. Alliances crumbled. Overnight, delegates screamed at each other across the chamber. Some demanded immediate evacuation of the frontier. Others argued for surrender, claiming that an intelligence millions of years old could not be fought. The Arathi, who had never lost a war, formally declared the situation unwinnable. It was in the middle of this chaos that General Ara Mwangi stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not slam her hand on the podium. She simply stood, and something about the way she carried herself made the room go quiet. It was the same calm she had shown at the exhibition, steady, measured, as if the universe burning around her was just whether she had dressed for. Conquered forces fought bravely, she said, and they have given us valuable information about the enemy. Humanity is grateful for their sacrifice. She paused. Humanity requests permission to deploy its elite warriors. The chamber stirred. Thyro leaned forward in her seat. She remembered that conversation at the reception, the sealed files, the polite smile that didn't reach Wang's eyes. A Divan delegate spoke up, his voice raw. How many do you intend to send? We lost hundreds of thousands. Mwangi looked at him. 12,000. The silence that followed was not respectful. It was the silence of people watching someone walk off a cliff. 12,000 soldiers against an enemy that had destroyed the combined might of 3 galactic superpowers. It was madness. It was a death wish. A sour representative spoke through their translation matrix. We appreciate humanity's courage, but this would be a meaningless sacrifice. We will not send your people to die for symbolism. Manga's expression didn't change. Its Not symbolism, she said quietly, and they won't die. Nobody believed her, but nobody had a better plan. The vote passed not out of hope, but out of pity. Let the young species make their gesture, let them have their noble death. It would buy the rest of the galaxy a few more days to prepare for the end. Thyro watched Mwangi leave the chamber. The human general walked with the same steady stride she always had, but there was something else now. Something in the set of her shoulders, in the way her jaw tightened just slightly. It wasn't fear, it wasn't desperation. It was the look of someone who had been holding something back for a very long time and was finally allowed to let go. Thyro followed her instincts. She filed a request for observer status with the human delegation. She wanted to see what humanity had been hiding behind those redacted files. She wanted to understand what could possibly make 12,000 soldiers worth sending against a god. The request was granted within the hour, and 3 days later Thyrovas boarded a human transport ship heading for a planet that didn't exist on any star chart, a world the humans called Forge Obsidian. She had no idea what she was about to see, but deep in her old careful mind, a small voice whispered that the galaxy's understanding of humanity was about to change forever. That voice was right. The planet didn't look like a military base. That was the first thing noticed. Forge Obsidian sat in a system with no official name, hidden behind a dense nebula that scrambled most long-range sensors. The planet itself was beautiful. In a harsh way, dark volcanic mountains, deep green forests, wide oceans, the color of iron. The sky was a permanent deep amber because of the mineral content in the atmosphere, and at night, clear as throat, the stars burned with a clarity that Theo had never seen anywhere else. The transport landed on a platform carved into the side of a mountain. General Mwangi was not there to greet her. Instead, a young officer named Lieutenant Priya Akefer led Theo to a guest quarters that was simple but comfortable. The colonel will meet you in the morning, Afer said. Get some rest, Ambassador. Tomorrow will be a long day. Theo did not rest. She stood at the window and watched the landscape. In the valley below she could see lights, not the harsh white lights of a military compound, but warm amber ones spread across what looked like a small town. She saw buildings with gardens. She saw pathways lined with trees. She heard very faintly the sound of music. This was not what she had expected. The next morning, Lieutenant Akefer took her to meet Colonel Idris Ape, the commanding officer of the Adamantine, which Thur learned was the official name for humanity's elite warriors. Ape was a tall man with dark brown skin and a shaved head. He had wide shoulders and hands that looked like they could crush stone, but his eyes were soft, almost gentle. He smiled when he met Thyro and offered her a cup of something warm and bitter that humans called coffee. She accepted it to be polite. It was terrible. She drank it anyway. You want to understand what we are, Ape said. It wasn't a question. The galaxy is about to die, Thyro replied, and your general believes 12,000 of you can stop it. Yes, Colonel, I want to understand. A nodded. He led her out of his office and into the heart of Forge Obsidian. What Theo saw over the next 8 hours dismantled everything she thought she knew about humanity. The Adamantine were not simply well-trained soldiers. They were something else entirely, something humanity had been building in secret for Over 2 centuries. Ape explained it as they walked through the facilities. Every adamantine operative had volunteered. The selection process took 3 years and eliminated 99% of applicants. Those who remained were already the finest soldiers humanity had ever produced, and then the real work began. First came the genetic augmentation. Human scientists had mapped their species' genome down to the last base pair and learned how to rewrite it. Adamantine operatives had bones reinforced with a carbon lattice weave that made them nearly unbreakable. Their muscles were restructured at the cellular level, giving them strength that no natural human could match. Their reflexes were enhanced until they could react to threats faster than most species could perceive them, and their healing. Thyra watched a training demonstration where an operative received a deep wound across the chest. The bleeding stopped in seconds. The tissue began closing on its own. Within minutes, the wound was a fatting scar. Within an hour, even the scar was gone. Then came the neural lacing. Each operative had a network of microscopic filaments threaded through their brain, connecting them directly to their weapons, their armor, their ships, and to each other. They could share tactical information at the speed of thought. They could aim a weapon with the precision of a targeting computer, because in a very real sense they were the targeting computer. They process combat data the way a normal human might process breathing automatically, constantly without effort. But the thing that made Thur's blood run cold was the third enhancement. 200 years ago, human scientists had discovered that their species carried a dormant gene for psychic ability. It was weak, so weak that in normal humans it manifested as nothing more than occasional gut feelings or strain dreams. But the adamantine program had found a way to activate it, strengthen it, and weaponize it. Thyral stood behind a reinforced observation window and watched a single operative, a woman no taller than General M. Wangi, stand in the center of an empty room, without moving, without making a sound. The woman lifted a 10-ton block of solid steel off the ground. She held it in the air for 30 seconds, then set it down as gently as if it were made of paper. Then she turned to a row of combat drones, and one by one their systems shut down. She hadn't touched them. She had reached into their circuits with her mind and turned them off. The Arathi have psychic warriors, Thiel said, her voice barely above a whisper. They are considered the most powerful in the galaxy. Ape stood beside her, arms crossed. The Arathi are born with their abilities. They're natural, beautiful. Even, he paused, ours aren't natural. We took something small and quiet inside us and forced it to grow. It's rougher, less elegant, but it's strong and it's hungry. Thiel turned to look at him. Why did you hide this? Because we wanted friends, not subjects, App said simply. If we had walked into the conquered 40 years ago and shown them what we could become, what do you think would have happened? The Divan would have demanded we destroy the program. The Arathi would have seen us as a threat to their dominance. The Salur would have tried to reverse engineer our methods, and every other species would have looked at us and seen monsters. He met her gaze. We are not monsters, Ambassador. We are people who chose to carry a very heavy burden so that others wouldn't have to. There's a difference. Thur spent the rest of the day watching the adamantine train. She watched a squad of 8 operatives run a combat simulation that had been designed to challenge an entire Divan battalion, 500 of their best warriors, the 8 humans. Completed it in 90 seconds. They moved like water, like shadow, like something that had never been fully alive and yet was more alive than anything had ever seen. They anticipated every threat. Before it appeared, they covered each other without speaking, without signals, each one knowing exactly where the others were and what they needed, but it was something else that stayed with her. Between the training sessions, she watched them simply exist. She saw them eating together, laughing together, arguing about books and music and philosophy. She passed a room where an operative was painting a landscape of a world she didn't recognize, done in soft blues and greens. She saw another operative sitting alone in a garden, reading poetry. You educate them, Thyral said to Ape. Extensively, he confirmed. Every adamantine studies philosophy, history, art, xenobiology, and ethics. They understand what they are. They understand what they could do if they chose to use their abilities without restraint, and they understand why they must never make that choice. And if one of them did, Ob's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped. That has never happened, and it never will, because we don't select for strength, Ambassador. We don't even select for intelligence. We select for conscience. Every one of them could tear this galaxy apart, and every one of them would die before they let that happen. That evening, Thur stood on the landing platform and watched the adamantine prepare to leave. Their ships were unlike anything the Conquered had ever built, black-holed, angular, with surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They made no sound. They emitted almost no energy signature. They were ghosts made of metal and purpose. 12,000 men and women boarded those ships. Thyra watched their faces as they walked past her. Some were young, some were old, some smiled, some were quiet. But every single one of them had the same thing in their eyes. Not anger, not bloodlust, not even courage. It was acceptance. They knew what they were walking into. They knew some of them would not come back, and they had made peace with that, the way a person makes peace with the sunrise. It was simply what was true, and they carried it without complaint. Colonel Ape was the last to board. He stopped in front of Thiel and extended his hand. She took it. His grip was warm and impossibly steady. Watch the feeds, Ambassador, he said, and when it's over, tell the galaxy what you saw, not what we are, what we chose to be. Ships launched in silence. They rose into the amber sky like dark birds, formed into a fleet and vanished into faster than light travel with a flash so brief that Thyral almost missed it. She stood on the platform for a long time. After they were gone, the wind from the mountains carried the scent of pine and volcanic stone. Somewhere in the valley below, that faint music was still playing. Thyro closed her 4 eyes and whispered something she had not said since she was a child, in a language her people only used for prayers. She prayed for them. She prayed for the galaxy, and somewhere deep in her chest, in a place she could not name, she felt something she had never felt before. Not fear, not hope, but the strange and terrible certainty that she was witnessing the beginning of a story the universe would never forget. The Conquered watched the battle on a 100,000 screens across a 100,000 worlds, and what they saw changed them forever. The adamantine fleet arrived at the edge of the Ashenvale expanse 12 hours after Leaving Forge Obsidian, Thyra was back. On Nexus Primata by then, sitting in the Conquered Central Command, a massive room filled with holographic displays that received real-time data from long-range observation probes. Every senior diplomat and military officer in the galaxy was there. The room was silent. The air smelled of fear. The probes showed what waited in the expanse. The Voron had grown since the first battle. Its biohips now numbered in the tens of thousands, clustered around a central structure so large that the probes couldn't capture it in a single image. The analysts called it the Maw, a living megastructure half a light year across, pulsing with that sickly blue-green light. It was part hive, part brain, part mouth. It was the heart of the swarm intelligence, and it breathed with the slow rhythm of something that had been alive since before the stars were born. The adamantine fleet, 240 ships, carrying 12,000 operatives, looked like dust motes approaching a thunderstorm. A Divan admiral watching from the command room muttered, "This is where they die." Then the humans did something nobody expected. Every fleet that had faced the Voron before had engaged at maximum range, firing from a distance, trying to stay away from the bioships. It was standard military doctrine for every species in the Conquered. You don't get close to something that can eat you. The adamantine flew straight in. Their black ships accelerated to speeds that shouldn't have been possible for vessels, their size cutting through the outer ring of biohips like needles through cloth. They didn't fire a single shot. During the approach, they went silent. No communications, no energy signatures. Nothing. For 17 minutes they were invisible. The Voron's biohips turned and searched, sensing something was wrong but unable to locate the threat. Then the adamantine opened fire, and the expanse burned. They did not use a single weapon type. The Conquered fleets had failed because the Voron adapted to every weapon after the first volley. Plasma, then kinetic, then psychic. The humans had studied the data from those battles, and they had built a doctrine around one simple idea: never let the enemy see the same thing twice. The adamantine used rotating weapon sequences controlled by their neural laces. Every ship, every weapon, every operative cycled through a randomized pattern of attack: ballistic rounds, plasma burst, sonic pulses, gravitational distortion charges, and directed psionic blasts, all switching every few seconds in patterns generated by algorithms that even the operatives themselves couldn't predict. The neural lace did the thinking, the humans did the fighting, and between the two they created a wall of destruction that shifted faster than the Voron could evolve against it. The first wave of biohip shattered. The second wave adapted to plasma and was hit with kinetic rounds. The third adapted to kinetic rounds and was torn apart by sonic pulses. The fourth adapted to sonic pulses and ran into gravitational charges that folded them in on themselves like paper. Each time the swarm adjusted, the pattern had already moved on. The Voron was fast. The adamantine were faster, but destroying biohips was not the objective. Colonel Ape's plan was surgical. The biochips were limbs. The Maw was the brain. Kill the brain and the swarm dies. Ape divided his forces into 3 groups. 2 groups, 10,000 operatives engaged the swarm fleet in open combat, drawing the Voron's attention outward, forcing it to focus its adaptive intelligence on defending against the rotating attacks. The third group, 2,000 operatives led by Ape himself, went straight for the mall. Thyro watched on the holographic display. As Ape's strike force breached the M's outer membrane, the structure was alive. Its walls were made of compressed biological matter thick as a mountain. Warm in pools, the adamantine cut through with plasma torches and psionic force, carving a tunnel into the body of the creature. Inside, the Voron threw everything it had at them. Parasitic organisms flooded the tunnels fast. Sharp eyeless things designed to burrow into a host's body and take control. They had consumed hundreds of thousands of soldiers from 3 different species. This way, they swarmed over the adamantine operatives in waves. The parasites tried to penetrate the operative skin. They failed. Snorts. The genetic augmentation had made the adamantine's immune systems into something closer to weapons than defenses, white blood cells that had been engineered to recognize and destroy any foreign biological material. Activated on contact, the parasites didn't just fail to infect the operatives, they were consumed, broken down, analyzed at the cellular level, and the data was shared across the neural network to every operative in the strike force in real time. Within minutes, the adamantine understood the Voron's biology better than the Voron understood theirs. The deeper they went, the worse it got. The tunnels shifted and closed behind them. Snorts. The walls grew teeth. The air became toxic. Gravity changed direction without warning. The Voron was not just defending itself. It was trying to digest them, treating them like food that had wandered into a stomach. Ape strike team pushed forward. They lost operatives. Thyro watched the casualty counter on the display climb. 30, then 60, then 100. Each number was a person. Each person had a name, a history, a face she had seen walking onto those ships. She gripped the arms of her chair until her joints ached, but they did not stop. They did not slow down. For 19 hours, Ape's team fought through the interior of a living nightmare, moving toward the central neural cluster, the core of the Voron's intelligence. 19 hours without rest, without retreat, without a single moment of hesitation. Thyro had studied warriors her entire life. She had watched the Divan in their fury, the Solar in their precision, the Arathi in their psychic brilliance, but she had never seen anything like this. This was not bravery. Bravery implied the presence of fear being overcome. Adamantine were beyond fear. They had accepted their deaths before they boarded the ships, and that acceptance had freed them to fight with a purity that was almost beautiful, almost, because it was also terrible. And Thyro never forgot that. At hour 19, Auckland, 7 remaining operatives reached the core. It was a chamber the size of a city, filled with neural tissue that glowed with the light of 1,000,000 consumed minds. This was the Voron's brain, the seat of an intelligence that had eaten civilizations across multiple galaxies over millions of years. It pulsed with a slow, ancient heartbeat. Ape stood before it. His armor was cracked. His left arm was broken. Blood ran down his face from a wound above his eye, but he was standing. He deactivated his weapons. He removed his helmet and he reached out, not with his hands but with his mind. The psionic connection hit the core like a thunderbolt. For a moment, Ape's consciousness touched the Voron's, and the Voron touched his. 2 minds face to face across an impossible divide, the Voron tried to consume him, the way it had consumed every mind it had ever encountered. It reached into Ape's thoughts, looking for fear, looking for weakness, looking for the cracks it could pour itself through. It found memories instead. Ape did not fight it. He opened his mind and showed the Voron what humanity was, not what the adamantine were, what humans were. He showed it 10,000 years of war. He showed it trenches filled with poison, gas, and cities turned to ash by fire that fell from the sky. He showed it humans starving other humans behind barbed wire. He showed it children marching into battle. He showed it every genocide, every massacre, every moment where humanity had turned its terrible creativity toward destroying itself. And then he showed it the other side. He showed it the people who walked into the fire to carry others out. He showed it hands reaching across battlefields to help enemies stand. He showed it the long, painful, bloody climb from savagery toward something better, never complete, never finished, but never abandoned. He showed the Voron, the species that had looked at its own monstrous capacity for destruction and said, "We will be more than this." And then he let the Voron understand with absolute clarity that the 12,000 who had come to fight it were the sharpest expression of that entire history, forged in the fire of a species that had been at war with itself since the day it first picked up a stone. Moss shuddered, the neural tissue convulsed across the expanse. The biochips faltered their movements, becoming erratic and uncoordinated. The Voron had consumed thousands of species. It had never encountered one that had already survived itself. The swarm began to retreat. It pulled away from the expanse, contracting inward, its biohips folding and collapsing as the intelligence behind them recoiled from something it could not process and could not adapt to. But Ape had not come to make it run. He had come to make sure it never came back. The signal went out across the neural network. Every adamantine operative received it simultaneously, and the fleet that had been holding the line against the swarm shifted from defense to pursuit. They hunted the Voron through the dark spaces between the stars. They burned its biohips. They shattered its structures. They followed every tendril, every fragment, every spore, and they destroyed it all with the same methodical thoroughness that they brought to everything they did. It took 3 weeks. When it was over, the ashen veil expanse was empty. The blue-green glow was gone. The stars burned clean, and the galaxy, which had watched every moment in stunned silence, began to breathe again. But the way they looked at humanity would never be the same. 6 months after the Battle of Ashenville, the galaxy was still afraid. But it was no longer afraid of the Voron. It was afraid of humanity. Galactic Concord reconvened on Nexus Primata, and the chamber felt different. Now, Thyrovas noticed it the moment she walked in. Before, the human delegation had been seated near the back in the section reserved for minor species. Now, the seats around them were empty, not because the delegates had moved closer, because they had moved away. Thyral understood. She had felt it herself, that cold weight in her chest when she watched the footage from the expanse. The adamantine had done what the 3 greatest military powers in the galaxy could not. They had faced a god and torn it apart with their hands, and they had done it with 12,000 soldiers. Every species in the Concord was now doing the same calculation in their Heads, if 12,000 humans could destroy the Voron, what could 12 million do? What could a 100 million do? What would happen if humanity ever decided it wanted something and the galaxy said no? General M. Wangi stood at the podium and read the final report of the 12,000 adamantine operatives deployed. 11,612 had returned. 388 had died inside the mall or during the 3-week pursuit that followed. Their names were read aloud, each one spoken carefully with weight. M. Wang's voice did not crack, but Thur could see the tension in her throat. She knew every one of those names. She had sent every one of those people to their deaths when the names were done. M. Wangi looked up at the chamber. The Voron is gone, she said. The frontier is secure. Humanity's obligation to the conquered is fulfilled. She paused, and the silence in the room was so deep that Thyro could hear her own heartbeat. The adamantine are being stood down. They will return to 4 Obsidian, and from there most of them will re-enter civilian life. They will become what they were before we called on them teachers, doctors, engineers, scientists, artists, parents. They were built to protect, not to conquer. The threat is over. They will rest now. Chamber received this with polite applause and private disbelief. Nobody trusted it. Why would humanity put away its greatest weapon? It didn't make sense. It had to be a trick, a performance designed to make the galaxy lower its guard while humanity positioned itself for expansion. That's what any other species would do. In the weeks that followed, Thyro watched the galaxy react. The Divan hegemony tripled its military budget. The Solar Dominion began researching genetic augmentation, trying to reverse engineer what the humans had done. The Arathi Warlands, who had formally declared the Voron situation unwinnable, said nothing at all, which was somehow worse. Secret diplomatic meetings were held. Alliances formed, not for mutual defense against external threats, but specifically to counter humanity. Thyro sat in her office on Nexus Primata and read the intelligence reports, and she felt tired. 312 years old, and she had never felt old until now. The Cathari Council sent her new orders. She was to travel to human space, locate the adamantine operatives who had supposedly returned to civilian life, and determine if humanity's claims were genuine. Was the program truly standing down, or were the elite warriors simply hiding again, waiting for the next time they were needed, or the next time they decided to take what they wanted? Thyro accepted the mission. She crossed into human space, passed through 3 colony systems, and tracked Colonel Idra's Apes post-service records to a small world called New Galway. It was a quiet planet, green hills, mild weather, a population of about 200,000, of farming and education. Colony, the kind of place where people went to live simply. She found Ake at a school in the colony's main settlement. It was a low stone building surrounded by gardens, and when she arrived, she could hear children's voices through the open windows. She stood outside and watched through the glass. Ape was sitting at the front of a small classroom surrounded by children between the ages of 8 and 12. He was reading to them from a book, an old one, with paper pages that he turned carefully with his large hands. His voice was warm and slow, shaped for young ears. He read the way someone reads when they love the words and want the listener to love them too. A girl in the front row raised her hand. She was struggling with something, a passage. She didn't understand. Ape set the book down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and explained it to her. He used small words. He was patient. He asked her questions to help her find the answer herself. When she finally understood, her face lit up and Ape smiled, a real smile, open and unguarded, with nothing hidden behind it. Thyrel's 4 eyes burned. She looked away. This was the man who had fought through the interior of a living god for 19 hours. This was the man who had touched the mind of an intelligence that had consumed galaxies and shown it the full horror of human history. This was the man who had led the hunt that erased the Voron from existence. And here he was teaching literature to children on a farming colony, reading to them from a paper book, helping a girl who couldn't parse a metaphor. She waited until the class ended. The children filed out, some of them waving goodbye to Ape, one of them hugging his leg. He ruffled the boy's hair and watched them go with that same soft expression. Then he looked up and saw Thur standing in the doorway. "Ambassador," he said. He didn't seem surprised. "I was wondering when someone would come." They sat together in the garden behind the school. The air smelled of cut grass and something sweet, flowers that Tyrell didn't recognize. The sun was warm somewhere nearby. Children were playing. "Your council sent you to see if we're really standing down." App said it wasn't a question. "Yes," Thiel said, "there was no point in pretending." "And what have you seen?" "I've seen you reading to children." Aiken nodded. Slowly he looked at his hands, those hands that had torn through the walls of a living nightmare. They were clean now. There was chalk dust on his fingers. "I teach 3 classes a day," he said. "Literature, history, and ethics. I grow tomatoes in a little plot behind my house. I'm learning to play the piano badly. On weekends I go fishing in a river about an hour's walk from here. I'm not very good at that either." He smiled. "It's a good life." Thiel studied him with all 4 eyes. She looked for the soldier underneath, for the weapon, for the monster, for the thing the galaxy was so afraid of. She found a man with chalk dust on his fingers and a peaceful expression, but she also found something else. It was in the way he held himself, that perfect stillness that came not from relaxation but from absolute control. It was in his eyes, which were warm and kind, and also somewhere in the very back carried a darkness that would never fully go away. She could see the weight he carried. It was enormous. It was invisible, and he bore it without complaint. The way mountain bears snow. "How do you carry it?" she asked quietly. "What you saw inside that thing, what you did. Ones who didn't come back." App was quiet. For a long time, the wind moved through the garden. A child laughed somewhere beyond the wall. "We carry it so they don't have to," he said, and he gestured toward the sound of the children. "That's what elite means to us, Ambassador. Not the killing, not the augmentation, not the power. It's the willingness to bear the cost of keeping others safe, and then coming home and choosing to be soft." Again he looked at her, and his eyes were clear. "Anyone can learn to fight. Anyone can be made strong, but the hard part, the part most people don't understand, is putting it down afterward. Walking away from what you could do and choosing to be gentle instead. That takes more strength than anything we did in the expanse." Thiel sat with that for a while. The sun moved across the sky. The children's laughter faded as they went home. The garden grew quiet. she returned to Nexus. Primata 3 weeks later, she had visited 9 more former adamantine operatives. Across human space, one was a surgeon on a hospital station, rebuilding shattered bodies with hands that could crush steel. One was an architect designing homes on a colony world. One was a musician playing in a small concert hall to audiences who had no idea what she was. One was raising 3 children on a farm, teaching them to be kind. All of them carried the same weight. All of them chose the same gentleness. Thyro filed her report to the Cathari Council. It was short, shorter than any report she had filed in 300 years of service. She could have written volumes. She could have detailed the augmentation, the psionic abilities, the tactical genius, the sheer terrifying potential of what humanity had built. Instead, she wrote 1 paragraph. Leave them alone. They are not a threat. They are something far more rare, good. People who are capable of terrible things and who choose goodness every single day. The galaxy fears them because it cannot understand them, and it cannot understand them because no other species has ever done what they have done, built the most powerful warriors in the history of the universe, and then ask those warriors to come home and be kind. Do not provoke them, do not corner them, do not test them. Simply be grateful that they exist and that they choose to stand between us and the dark. There is no force in the galaxy that can defeat that choice. I recommend we stop trying. She submitted the report, closed her terminal, and sat alone in her office for a long time. On New Galway, night fell over the green hills. Colonel Idrisok, retired, sat on the porch of his small house and watched the stars come out. Somewhere deep in his augmented mind, the ghost echo of the Voron's dying scream still lingered, soft as a whisper, sharp as a scar it would never fully leave. He had accepted that. He closed his eyes. He breathed. The wind carried the smell of his tomato garden and the distant sound of the river. Tomorrow he would wake early. He would walk to the school. Snorts. He would sit in front of a room full of children who looked at him and saw nothing but a kind man with a warm voice and chalk dust on his fingers. He would open a book and he would read to them, and he would help them understand words that were bigger than they were, and that more than the battle, more than the more than the thing he had done. With his mind in that glowing chamber at the heart of a dead god, that would be the bravest thing he did all day. The stars burned above him, clean and bright. He breathed, he rested, he was home.